Hi everybody. Alright, this is going to be week 3, I know it's week late, sorry, on federalism. Um, Again, a review, hopefully blow through some of the um, more significant concepts, reinforce some more significant things, but maybe without all the examples that take up a lot of class time. Okay, so the first part of this. Federalism is defined as a system of divided government. That means this power is divided between federal and state government. The federal being the national government and the state being the state government. Each layer of government has some specific duties, some areas of power, things like that. Depending on the federal system, there can be a clear distinguishing line between the federal and state powers, or there could be a lot of mixing, as we saw with the layer cake federalism versus the marble cake federalism, which we'll start with now. Okay, so dual layer federalism. There are those two layers we talked about, federal and state, and never the two shall meet power-wise. Think of it like that. There is no intermingling between the two, between the federal government and the state government. The federal government will do things like immigration, the state will do education, and notice there is no overlap in immigration and education between the federal government and the state government. Federal government is the 100% authority on immigration, state 100% authority on education. That is layer cake federalism / dual federalism. Two names, same thing. Next we have cooperative federalism. Cooperative federalism, that's a weird thing, involves more, if you can believe it, cooperation between the federal and state governments on a number of issues. They may share power, they may share resources, the federal government may give the states money, but with some strings attached. There's a more blurry line between the federal government and the state government. Even if the state government has clear authority in a matter, in cooperative federalism, the federal government can exercise some authority in that clear state matter by attaching some dough to it. And I'll say first, something that's clearly in the federal government may decide to cede some of that power to the state government. So the federal government maybe saves some money, or the state government, the federal government may decide the state government's more equipped to handle the issue or can respond better to local needs. So, same map, same thing before, but things are divided. Not getting that to focus that much. Or sorry, things are cooperative. So, just like a layer cake, look here. How do I do this? Okay, immigration. This is the immigration issue. Notice there's some federal government power here, and the power extends down here to the state, and so the state has some little area of control over immigration. Maybe the state offers some, state police force to help with enforcing immigration laws, or maybe the state offers some social services to immigrants, and it's not 100% the federal government's job or federal government's responsibility to do things. here we have education. You see there's a lot of education in the state, and then we have, this is my attempt to draw a line into the federal area. The education is a state issue, however, through grants, supporting of particular curricula, the federal government can offer or can influence state education decisions. Gave one example during the Bush administration. The federal government spent a lot of money developing abstinence-only sex education programs, and then offered it to the states for free. Like, hey, we spent this $1 billion developing all these different abstinence-only sex education programs. Wouldn't you rather have one of our free abstinence sex education programs rather than having to spend money on creating your own? And the states, a lot of them, not having a lot of money, said, okay, we'll take your puritanical sex ed program. So that's how that worked. An example of cooperative federalism. And again, marble cake federalism is an alternative name for it. It's called that because in a marble cake, the different flavors are all intermixed in between each other. So the issue of federalism, the issue of federalism centers around where power should be concentrated and what level of government should have power over which issue. And that's been a long-running debate in our American political system. Not necessarily right or wrong answers. They're better and worse answers, or better and worse conclusions, but some of it's depending on your values. Recently, there's been a little bit of a kerfuffle over immigration and if the state should have any role in it. The federal government says that it's a federal government issue and the states don't get to do anything with it or set their own policies. The states, the southern states in Arizona, want to take over some of that immigration power because they're saying, listen, the federal government is not down here in the state. This is something that's affecting our state, so we should deal with it as we best see fit. So there's a debate over that. Courts will rule in. The courts have ruled in on some of the issues. Anyway, so keep that debate in mind. Think for yourself on what issues should the federal government have control, on what issues should the state government have control, what issues does the federal government have the ability to respond to, and what issues does the federal government not have the ability to respond to, and the same thing for the states. All right, cool. So we've had both the dual federalist system and the cooperative federalist system throughout our history. They've generally been, you can see a clear separation as to when we switched over. So we had a dual federal system from the beginning of the nation to about the Great Depression. Here and there started to be some cooperative federalist aspects that snuck into the system, but by and large, we had a dual federalist system, and a lot of the policies still reflected that. Teddy Roosevelt called for and supported a national universal health insurance system, but a lot of his system was actually concentrated at the state level. So there was this national movement for a universal health system, but it would essentially be controlled by state governments and even smaller local governments. And he was a nationalist. So we see that philosophy continue to exist up until the Great Depression. The Great Depression hits, people are out of homes, out of work, out of food, out of water, and life is sad. The state governments don't have the resources to respond, and so people look to the federal government. The federal government steps in, exercises a lot more power, becomes involved in education, social service issues, unemployment, providing jobs to people, regulating the economy, regulating, specifically like the stock market and banks and such and monopolies more heavily, because people looked around and was like, the banks and the stock market and this big boom caused this problem. We should have somebody step in and make this problem not happen again. And the federal government was the one that could do that. After that, we've had cooperative federalism. Okay. Two terms you should know: categorical grants and block grants. Categorical grants represent a earlier version of cooperative federalism. So both these grants are money that the federal government grants to states. The federal government's just like, states, we have money. You want to apply for it and get a grant? That's how that is. In cooperative federalism, we have categorical grants. Categorical grants are grants given to states that have lots of strings attached to them, / and are designed for very specific purposes. So, an example of a categorical grant may be the federal government goes to North Carolina and says, hey, North Carolina, we have $50 million for you to spend on improving the bus transportation service in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Do you want that $50 million to improve your bus transit service in Fayetteville, North Carolina? You can't use that money for anything else. Bus, Fayetteville, yes or no? $50 million, right? Categorical grants can be a little more broad than that. Example I think I used in a few of the classes. Federal government gives a grant to North Carolina, say $50 million, and says, North Carolina, here's money to build hospitals in rural areas. The federal government would generally define what rural meant. Maybe it meant a certain number of people in a county or a certain number of people per square mile. And also that grant says build hospitals. So it can't be used to renovate a hospital. It can't be used to buy equipment for already existing hospitals. It has to be used to build a hospital, and it has to be used in rural areas in which the federal government defines as being rural. Now the state can choose which rural areas they want to build the hospital in that meet the criteria, but there's still a lot of those strings attached, so it would be a categorical grant. After Nixon / the Civil Rights Movement / Vietnam, we had this reaction from a lot of America, a lot of white America that was reacting against the Civil Rights Movement, distrusting federal government because they got all involved in helping that along. Nixon was being corrupt, which eroded federal or citizen confidence in the federal government, and Vietnam. Who went to war with Vietnam? The United States, not North Carolina or Texas or Wyoming. So with the war in Vietnam not going well, people being drafted, that also eroded confidence in the federal government. So people started to move from a strong federal government to a stronger state governments, but still not like dual federalist state governments. The other part of this is once the state governments had federal money, they didn't really want to give it up. So what we got in place were what are known as block grants. It was a way for the federal government to funnel money to states while at the same time taking power away from the federal government. So before, under cooperative grants, there were those strings attached to it. Now the federal government is giving money to states with little to no strings attached. They're saying, hey, North Carolina, here's $50 million to spend on hospitals. Have fun. North Carolina can spend it on buying new equipment for hospitals, building hospitals, hiring doctors, nurses, ambulances, use it to pay doctors or nurses more money, do whatever they want to with it. There's $50 million, as long as they spend it on medical stuff. They could also, the federal government may also say, hey, North Carolina, here's $100 million. Don't blow it all in Vegas. No strings attached, other than not spending it all on Red 7 in Vegas. Right? Okay. So that's categorical grants and block grants. Benefits and drawbacks to federalism, equality and inequality within the system. One of the biggest benefits of federalism is that with our 50 states, we have 50 different, theoretically at least, we have 50 different governments doing 50 different things to try and solve the problems of the day. So we have education, and we want to have a good education system. We can have 50 different systems or 50 different educational policies going on throughout the nation, and we can see which works and what doesn't work. And we can do that without kind of destroying the education system of the entire nation. For example, Mississippi introduces an education program and it stinks. Who cares? It's Mississippi. They're terrible. Of course they're going to come up with a bad education system because they already had a bad education system, so there aren't any smart people in Mississippi. Mississippi is the worst state ever. Have I told you how much Mississippi is terrible? Okay, good. Massachusetts, on the other hand, has got its stuff together. It's got one of the best education systems in the entire world. We can look at Massachusetts and say, what is Massachusetts doing in their education system that's different from Mississippi? And how can we apply what Massachusetts has to Mississippi to make Mississippi's education system better? Think of it another way. What if the national government had control over the entire education system and the national government implemented a Mississippi-style education system? That would kind of suck. Now all of a sudden we have the entire nation suffering under the terribleness that is Mississippi. However, with these 50 different programs or 50 different states, we can have these 50 different policies. If you want a hint as to what the difference is between Massachusetts and Mississippi education-wise, it's the level of poverty. We find that all schools, the majority of impact, the thing that has the greatest impact on whether or not a child succeeds educationally is not the school and it's not the teacher. It's that child's socioeconomic status, that child's prenatal and early health care, and parents' education level. That makes up something to 60 to 70% of what affects a child's long-term educational achievement. The school represents about 30 to 40% of impact on a child's education. Within that 30 to 40%, the teacher is the largest part of that. But the teacher is only 70% of this 30 to 40% that impacts a child's education. So if you want to solve the problem of failing schools, you have to solve the problem of poverty. And that's why Mississippi is terrible, because Mississippi has a lot of poverty, and that's why Massachusetts is one of the best, if not the best, education systems in the entire world, because it doesn't have the poverty of Mississippi. Boom. Drawbacks, lots of inefficiencies. So if you have, and this is also a benefit too, you have the federal government and the state government sort of jockeying for power over specific issues, over specific areas. The federal government wants power in immigration, the state government wants power in immigration. The federal government wants power over voting rights, the state government wants power over voting rights. If the federal government and state government are fighting each other for that power, it means neither side can be very powerful, and then theoretically the rights of the citizens are protected. Of course, that also means when two sides are fighting each other instead of actually working together to get something done, there's going to be lots of inefficiencies, lots of money is going to be wasted, and we won't actually have any accomplishments. Cost benefit, what do you want to do? We have 50 different states, which allows for that 50 different laboratories, but with 50 different laboratories also comes 50 different rules and regulations, which if you're a business or a normal citizen, and you are trying to move to a new state or open a business in a new state, you've got a whole new set of rules and regulations that you got to learn, figure out, bureaucracy you got to navigate through to get whatever it is you need to get. Okay. One more note on drawback, and this is on inequality, and this is to me the biggest thing. And it's the biggest thing because I care about voting. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say voting is a good thing. Voting is a right that everybody should have, and we should make it easier, not more difficult, for people to vote. I think voting should be one of those inalienable rights. I think it's important. Anyway, some states don't value voting as much as I do. Some states will take away people's rights to vote based upon criminal history. For example, in a number of states, if you commit a felony, you lose your right to vote. You may lose it for the rest of your life that you're in the state. You may lose it for a certain number of time after you commit the felony. You may lose it just while you're being punished for the felony, but you can lose it. Other states, you commit a felony, you don't lose your right to vote. So if you're in the worst place in the world, Mississippi, and you have a pound of marijuana, which would be a lot, and that's a felony in Mississippi, and they take away your right to vote and put you in jail for the rest of your life. If you're in Colorado and you have a pound of marijuana, and all of a sudden now everybody's your best friend, cops are asking you for a light on the street, you not only don't go to jail and don't lose your right to vote, but you have gotten a bunch of cops high on marijuana because they're all like, yay. That's kind of a major inequality. Not all citizens have the same rights and freedoms, right? And I think that's the best possible example I could have given. Hold on 1 second. Be back. Okay, I'm back. Y'all all miss me for so long. So personal life stuff. There's a girls' night happening here right now. My house is invaded by house I mean apartment. I think there's like 10 elementary school teachers out there right now. And I was told that I had to hide in here because it's girls' night. So that works. Sad for me. Anyway. Punishment inequalities, blah, blah, blah. The federal government makes transfer payments. Alright, these are Social Security, welfare, grants from rich states to poor states. That reduces inequality between the states. So, places of unfathomable sadness like Mississippi can become fathomably sad because New York is busy propping them up. Okay? So states give tax revenue to the federal government, and we say states, we mean all the citizens in the state. And then if we collect together, we measure it. A state contributes X number of dollars to the federal government. The federal government takes that money and then distributes it back out to the states, but poor states get more. And Mississippi, being the worst state ever, gets a lot of that money. You can see a percentage of the non-paying income tax by population map. Notice that the red states, which are also generally the politically red states, take most of the money from the federal government, and the blue states are the ones that give most of the money to the federal government in general. Alright, so there's Alaska on there. They have a lot of oil, so they generate a lot of revenue. North Dakota is experiencing a huge natural gas boom right now. If you want to make 6 figures, move to North Dakota, live in a shipping container, and do natural gas stuff, and you'll make lots of money. But, in general, the northeastern states, the western states contribute money to the federal government, and they get back less than they contribute, whereas states in the south contribute less than they get back. And I guess that's it. Any questions? You can email me, text me, or call me. Trying to make sure there wasn't anything. Nope. Those are the big highlights. System of divided government. We got dual federalism, which was largely in place before the Great Depression. There's a little more breakdown on the slides as to the different eras, but for just an overall picture. The big shift in American politics happened during the Great Depression, and since then we've had a cooperative federal system, but lots of race baiting. Nixon and Vietnam have softened that federal government power some, but still cooperative federalism. So, have a good whatever it is when you're watching this, and I'll see you at some point.